Chapter 8. Escape. Thursday morning, October 29th. Merlin took his time fetching Spider's clothes. With the girl recovering in the attic, and his father and the rest of the Spellclave practicing down at the archery range, no one would know what he was about to attempt. If it didn't work, he wouldn't get into trouble, and if it did, he'd be free. He felt a bit guilty as he remembered the price of that freedom, but he didn't see what he could have done to help Spider, and it was all over now. Not even his father could turn back the clock. He thrust the girl to the back of his mind and waited in his room, listening to doors slam and feet crunch down the path until everything was quiet. Then he crept to the window and peered through a crack in the shutters. His room looked out on the shed, where the goshawk lived, the idea being that Hunter could keep an eye on Merlin, but it worked both ways. He watched his father shut the bird in, then take a shortcut across the garden, swinging his stick at the undergrowth. He'd put a braid in his hair and fastened it with a black bared feather. As he passed beneath Merlin's window, he looked up and smiled. Merlin ducked, heart banging, but footsteps crunched away along the gravel path, and when he dared look again, his father had gone. He let out the breath he'd been holding, and hurried down to the hall. Faint bronze glimmers behind the coat hooks betrayed the locations of dying spells, but Merlin ignored these and went for the big one. As he'd hoped, Hawk had replaced the dead spell in the keyhole with a fresh, live one. Shining in the gloom like an emerald star, its illusion reached all the way to the gates, making the lodge appear uninhabited to human eyes. A little shiver ran down Merlin's back. Very carefully, he began to ease the spell free. "What are you doing?" demanded a voice behind him. The spell dropped to the mat. Merlin whirled desperately, trying to think of an excuse. As always, on these occasions, his mind was a complete blank. He broke off, staring. He couldn't help it. In her white dress, her silver hair shining in the shadows, Spider stood on the landing at the top of the first flight of stairs. She was wearing her glasses and looking at him in a very peculiar manner. Merlin's heart gave a little jump. "I thought you were supposed to be getting my clothes," she said, frowning at the mat. Merlin came to with a start, retrieved the spell, and hurriedly stuffed it under his sweater. His cheeks burned. I was just getting them," he said. "I thought you were still asleep." She should have been asleep. Even Claudia had slept for nearly 2 days after Hunter ate her familiar. "I've had quite enough sleep, thank you very much. I'm cold and I want my clothes back. Your father said I could have them." He noticed she was shivering. As she spoke, some of the haughtiness seemed to run out of her. She came down the rest of the stairs still frowning. "What were you doing with that spell?" Merlin almost told her. But she was part of the Spellclave now. One of the enemy. "Nothing," he mumbled, sliding past her. "I'll get them, but you should be resting, Spider." To his surprise, she giggled, though it sounded a bit strained. "My name isn't Spider, stupid. It's Natalie. Nat for short, and I'm getting out of here before those crazy parents of yours come back. If you had any sense in your skull, you'd come with me." "Getting out?" Merlin repeated. "But you can't. You're bound to the Spellclave for life. Anyway, Claudia's not my mother," he added, realizing what she must have thought. Prickles of memory threatened. He thrust them away before they brought tears. Natalie sighed. "I'm not bonded to anything, silly. That spider wasn't my familiar." "Wasn't your familiar? But father said—" "Your father told you it was, so you believed him? Grow up, Merlin. There's no such thing as real magic. Everyone knows that. Nothing happened to me in the cellar. Doesn't that prove it? I think your father's horrible. Letting your goshawk eat people's pets? But that's what hawks do. They're meat-eaters, so it's natural for them. The hawk doesn't know any better." Merlin stared at her in disbelief. He'd never forgive Hunter if he ate Red-Eye. Did that prove her spider hadn't been a familiar? Or that the bonding had worked so well she wasn't even aware of it? "You fell off the stool," he pointed out. "Are you sure nothing happened? Don't you feel sick or dizzy or anything?" "I was only pretending," she said, but she sounded less sure than before. Then she shook herself and her voice became firmer. "Where are my clothes? I'll get them myself if you're afraid of getting in trouble." Merlin led the way, occasionally glancing back at the girl. She might sound scornful, but she didn't look at all well. She was very pale and her hands trembled. She had to use the banister to pull herself up the stairs. "Are you sure you're not bonded?" he asked suspiciously, opening the door of one of the second-floor bedrooms. She sighed. "Of course I'm sure. Even if there were such a thing as real magic, I know something like that, wouldn't I? Turn around and don't peek." Merlin turned his back and chewed his lip. "Not necessarily. Not until you defied father and he wanted to punish you. You wouldn't." Natalie dressed so quickly that before he knew it, she pushed past him, stumbled downstairs and was wrestling with the front door. Since the Spellclave was all outside, it was unbolted, but still it didn't budge. Father locked it before he replaced the illusion spell, he explained. He often wondered why Hawk bothered with keys since the spells were designed to keep curious strangers from seeing the truth. But now he was glad of the delay. You're serious about running away, aren't you? She turned, closed her eyes for a few seconds, then opened them again. Where's the key? Merlin hesitated. She certainly wasn't acting as if she were bonded, but she could be testing him. Father's got it. He considered her carefully. I know where there's a spare, though. I'll unlock the door and show you the quickest way out of the wood. If you'll help me get Red-Eye out of the cellar. He held his breath. Natalie stared at him. He couldn't read her expression, but several different emotions crossed her face. Finally, she said, "All right," and looked at him expectantly. He fingered the spell and licked his lips. The cellar's locked, too, he admitted. But if there's another key anywhere, Father keeps it well hidden. He probably used an illusion spell on it. I don't have time to help you look for it, if that's what you mean. We'll just have to leave your mouse and come back for him later when we bring the police up here. He'll be safe enough. I doubt your father will do anything to him if you're not around to see it. Merlin turned queasy at the very thought. No! You don't understand. I can't go without Red-Eye. Merlin! She grabbed his sweater and shook hard, showing the same fierce strength as when she snatched the tray. He cringed, but she took a deep breath and continued more reasonably. Look, I know you're fond of your mouse. I was fond enough of Itzy, and he was just some spider I found in the bathroom. But you have to get things into perspective. If we don't get out of here soon, your father's going to come back and catch us both. Then, we will be in trouble. Accept it. There's no way you're going to get the mouse out through a locked door. Merlin shriveled inside. Don't. That's not fair. I know I'm hopeless at spellcasting, but I thought you might help. She let him go, scowling. Not that again. I told you, I'm not a witch. And I told you, we're not witches. We're spell mages. So you keep saying. They stared at each other, both of them trembling. Call us casters, Merlin said with a sigh. Everyone else does. She didn't laugh, but she looked less angry. Hesitantly, he brought out the spell he'd taken from the keyhole. Her gaze flickered to his hand. She said nothing. At least let me try, he said. I think I managed to transport your spider when you were touching the spell in the supermarket. While you were being, bonded, I managed to smuggle a spell into Red-Eye's bedding. That's how you do a transport, you see. You put a spell at each end. I thought if there was one inside Red-Eye's cage and I got a powerful one on this side of the door, then it might work. Especially if you'd help me, like you did before. Father says it's not possible to transfer power like that unless you're a spell lord. But I've been thinking about it, and I'm sure something happened when we fell down together in the supermarket. Just get on with it. What do I have to do? Nothing. That is, touch the spell, that's all. Natalie grasped the spell firmly and raised her chin. Her eyes held a challenge. Go on then. But this time I'm watching you, great wizard Merlin. Don't try that firework trick again, all right? Merlin closed his eyes. Draw the power up your arm. Feel it flow through your veins. Feel its heat fill you up. In the early days, one of his father's favorite lessons had been to lock him in his room and make him practice transporting food. He used to say when Merlin was hungry enough, he'd stop being so useless. Merlin had stayed hungry, but he knew the theory by heart. Hearing Natalie's sharp intake of breath, he opened his eyes and looked around eagerly. If wanting was enough, he'd have transported the entire contents of the cellar into the passage. Generator, bench, stools, empty tanks, everything. Not only did he want Red-Eye safe, but almost as badly he wanted to show Natalie he could do it. But there was no spell flash. The spell cooled and dimmed, and Natalie let go. She frowned at her fingers a moment, then shook her head. Satisfied now? She said. Merlin clutched the spell tighter, a chill breathing down his neck as he realized what must have happened. That dark smile. He knew, he whispered. Father must have seen the spell in Red-Eye's cage and taken it out. Oh, he's going to murder me! All the more reason to get out of here then, isn't there? If you won't tell me where the key is, I'll climb out of a window. With a determined look on her pale face, Natalie opened the door to one of the downstairs rooms. Merlin ran after her and caught hold of the back of her sweatshirt. She scowled at his hand. The key's under the mat, he said, hopelessness closing around him like a cloud. Take it and go. Turn right when you get over the gate. Otherwise, you'll end up at the archery range and someone will see you. I'll put Father off the scent for as long as I can. But I'm warning you now. If he tries to pull off one of Red-Eye's legs like he did to your spider, I'll tell him everything right away. Natalie was already scrabbling under the mat. She found the key and flung the door wide. Sunlight lanced into the hall, bringing cold air and damp woodland smells. She raised her face to the sky and inhaled as if she were taking her first ever breath. Then she turned and gave him a hesitant look. Are you going to be all right? Tears filled Merlin's eyes. Not really. Hunter will eat Red-Eye now. He didn't think she'd heard. She was already running down the path, but after 3 strides she stopped, kicked at the gravel, and came back. What would make your father open the cellar door? Merlin tried to think. I don't know, there's the generators. If they stop working, he'd have to go down and fix them, I suppose. And there's the spells, of course. I think Father and Claudia are doing experiments on them. They've got him down in the tunnel you saw. How about a fire? He blinked again. Set fire to the lodge, you mean? It was a dreadful, wild idea. But what if the spells catch? Spellfire's dangerous. You can't put it out till the spells die, and there's whole sacks of them down there. They burned the whole wood down. We only need a small fire, just to make some smoke. Then, when your father opens the cellar to rescue the spells, we sneak in, grab your mouse, and run. Merlin's heart did peculiar things. Red-Eye might burn too. We'll get him out before then. He cast a doubtful look upstairs. What if the fire spreads to his room? Then he shook himself. He'd have to leave his computer behind anyway, and computers could be replaced, unlike familiars. He shivered, half excitement, half terror. I suppose we could soak some of my old clothes in diesel oil, he said slowly. There's a tank of it outside, for the generators. A strange gleam came to Natalie's eyes. For a full minute, she stood and stared at the cellar door, ripples shivering down her silver hair. When she finally spoke, her voice had a hard edge to it that hadn't been there before. Let's do it.